All right, everybody, welcome to BO Boys for Thursday, June 13th. Fuck it, it's a raw feed. We're doing it live. I'm Clayton.
Yeah, I'm Pat. Clayton, everyone in the audience, throw your ones up. Acknowledge him. Acknowledge our tribal chief is joining us on the BO Boys today. Scott Mendelson, the icon, the legend, is here. Scott, thank you for joining the BO Boys on this very special weekend.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure.
Well, we are heading into Father's Day weekend, and basically, of course, our box office daddy is here, Scott Mendelson. So we got so much to get into. Inside Out weekend. We're going to talk Big Willie, but right off the top, just want to, because I don't think we've talked about it on the show with you. October 8th in Los Angeles, the Yard Theater. Scott Mendelson, you are joining us on stage for the BO Boys in Box Office Save America, BO Boys live show. How excited are you to get back on stage, get back to your theater roots?
I'm trying to think the last time I did any kind of stage stuff. I did some improv work, but that was like before I had kids.
Okay. Okay.
So, I mean, we're talking 17 years.
Wow. Wow.
I did theater in high school just because I liked it and it was fun. But I didn't do it in college because, I studied film, and the theater program there, because it was partially for theater majors, you were never going to get a major role unless you were in the theater program. Because when you're, as part of the program, if you don't get big roles, you don't pass your classes.
Right. So you basically have found the workaround in that you have done decades of box office analysis, built yourself up in that world so that now you could finally get the big role co-starring in the BO Boys first ever live show. I mean, that's how you do it. You don't take acting classes. You don't go out for auditions. You build yourself up to be the icon, and now on stage with the BO Boys. It's going to be fantastic.
Do I have to learn how to sing again?
Did you know how to sing before?
Well, I failed spectacularly, but I did do a couple musicals in high school.
I mean, you can open any way you want. If you want to open the show with a herald, if you want to do a song, anything you want to do, listen, we're open to it.
I'll pull the audience.
Yes. Whatever the audience wants to see, that's what we're going to do. So that's going to be huge. It's going to be October 8th in LA. Get your tickets now. Scott Mendelson, first time on stage in 17 years. So this is, I mean, that's the length of time, I think, between Bad Boys 2 and Bad Boys 3, possibly.
Yes.
Ironically. Yeah. So there you go. I mean, and we know how huge Bad Boys 3 was. So I think that's going to translate here. The audience is hungry for Bad Boys reuniting, Scott Mendelson getting back on stage. So Scott, let's start off with these Bad Boys. I mean, Bad Boys 4, which was not called Bad Boys for Life, which, I mean, we all knew that when 3-0.
I think if they knew the third one was going to be so well received, they would have gotten a fourth one. They were like, they probably would have saved that, but whatever.
Right. But it worked, Ride or Die. So, I mean, what is your initial reaction? Of course, everyone read the Outside Scoop, Scott Mendelson's newsletter, his blog, articles. You wrote about this, but like few days into this opening week, did this overperform even your expectations, or was this pretty much what you expected it to do? 56 million opening weekend.
This is basically what I expected. I mean, there was always a fear that, it's just another one of these, or the world has changed in such a way in the last 4 years, and all the stuff that we were all clutching our pearls about, even though, as we've seen since March of 2021 with Godzilla v. Kong, generally speaking, films that would have been commercially surefire hits before COVID, before streaming, before PVOD and all that stuff, tend to still do well. There are a couple exceptions over the years. I do think Kenneth Branagh's Hercule Poirot series got kneecapped by the global pandemic and the changes in the marketplace. And, at least Disney gave him a third one. That was nice of them. And even nicer, is that they removed Artemis Fowl from the face of the earth. So now it'll be like that never existed. To which Branagh says, "Thank you."
Artemis
Or
Fowl.
since he
Wow,
always
that
plays
really
Russia,
did
this
get.
stuff. Thank you. Yeah, never.
Yeah. So Bad Boys opened to what it would have opened to 5 years ago if there's
Yes.
never. And I guess, I mean, we talked about this a little bit before we jumped on air, but the slap. I mean, the slap means nothing. Is that safe to say?
I think to people in the real world, the slap was a big deal for about a week. You know, it happened on Sunday, the 27th of March, give or take, 2022. We all talked about it. We all discoursed, you know, et cetera, et cetera. By that Friday, the Academy comes out and says, you're not allowed back to the Oscars for 10 years. And I would argue that in the minds of most people, that was okay. The punishment fits the crime.
Right.
I mean, I joke a lot about how, you know, if I punch somebody at McDonald's, I'm probably going to be eating Burger King for a while. And just, you know, the incident happened at the Oscars. Ergo, he is not allowed to go to the Oscars for a decade.
Right.
That seems fair. And beyond that, it's really not my business. And
Now,
I think regular, you know, quote unquote, regular people, civilians, not perpetually online, not the people in the media that, you know, live or die by clicks. So they kind of had to keep pretending that this still mattered. And that's, you know, I hate the game, not the players, but, you know, but to the real world, again, I think after the Academy gave down a reasonable punishment, the world moved on.
Now, Scott, do you think any actors are going to take the wrong lesson from this in that they see the slap and really Will Smith had not done, we talked about Emancipation off mic, but that was an Apple release. It was not a great movie, as you said, so it wasn't really going to do anything. Do you think there's any stars that are struggling at the box office that are like, here we go, next Oscars, I slap someone, my next movie, gonna be a big hit? Now, I'm not saying that's a logical way to think, but not all actors are very hyper intelligent. So do you think that that's a possibility? Like, let's just talk about someone like Chris Hemsworth, who's had some pretty bad box office. Does he think 1 + 1 equals 2 for me?
If you're Saoirse Ronan, you might be thinking, maybe if I slap somebody on stage, my next art house Oscar film, I might actually finally win my Oscar.
Okay.
And I'm not just saying that because I kind of want to see that happen for purient reasons, but you never know.
Yeah.
Who would you be your jokes aside, casting? I mean, because I don't think there's anyone on earth that's arguing that it helped him.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think it hurt him. And, you know, Will Smith from around 2002 to 2008 was the biggest star in Hollywood, period, bar none. Because not only was he opening, you know, sequels like Bad Boys 2 and Men in Black 2, but he was opening original and or new to you adaptations like I, Robot, The Pursuit of Happiness, Shark Tale, I Am Legend, Hancock, to massive numbers.
I mean, Hitch is about as movie star a movie as it gets. That the premise there is, look at this movie star train Kevin James.
He's basically watch Will Smith play a non-toxic pickup artist.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the hook, and that was enough for a $45 million opening weekend. Made 179 domestic. That's still the biggest, sans inflation, Hollywood romantic comedy in North America, behind My Big Fat Greek Wedding and, believe it or not, What Women Want. But after Hancock opens amid mixed reviews and allegations of behind-the-scenes melodrama, which, again, the real world didn't care about. But it still does $625 million worldwide, which was more than Iron Man that summer, by the way.
Wow. We should have got the HCU, is what you're saying. We should have got the Hancock Cinematic Universe. Okay, maybe not.
I like Hancock quite a bit, but I again, you know, I'm an old cranky, not everything needs a sequel kind of guy. But because back then, again, you didn't need an I Am Legend 2 to capitalize an I Am Legend. You just go off and do something else.
Right.
And he comes out with 7 pounds in late 2008, which is held up as this disaster, even though it is this very dark, very grim, very somber melodrama about organ donations and suicide that still makes 169 million worldwide on a 50 budget, which by today's standards would be a fucking miracle.
Right. Could you imagine if Tom Holland opened 7 pounds and it made 160 million worldwide. He would
Any
be hailed as our
random
new
white guy
Christ.
from the last 20 years that pulled that off would be considered literally, he would be treated like a Tom Cruise.
Yes.
Now, Scott, you invoked Hancock. Now, we had been talking about, now that this Bad Boys movie was a success, where do we go IP wise with Will Smith? We threw out Men in Black. We threw out I Am Legend 2. We threw out, Pat even threw out another Independence Day sequel, which I think is not going to happen. But I mean, anything's possible now.
I think that's an event.
Here's the weird thing.
Hancock 2 is something we didn't think about.
I certainly don't want Independence Day 3. Or 2 was a trash fire of monumental proportions.
Yes.
And I say that somebody who loves the first Independence Day and thinks White House Down is about as good as Die Hard. Speed is better, but I digress. Happy 30th birthday.
Yes.
But Men in Black 3 was so good, and Bad Boys for Life was so good that I'm like,
he knows how to do these prequels. Yeah.
I mean, he died in between the first and second film, but so did Brett Spiner. Died between the first and second film, and he's still around in part 2. So,
so I mean, I had this thought this morning actually, because I can't stop thinking about ID4 Part 3.
Shower thought or toilet thought?
This was a shower thought, and there were where you get your cleanest thoughts, and I had a thought about ID4 3. Could this, and I know 2 puts a stain on it, but could this be Will Smith's Top Gun Maverick, in the sense of it has some gravitas to it? I know the first movie is silly and all that, but it's silly in the way that I think Top Gun was. And I do see a world in which they do an Independence Day sequel. Will Smith, he didn't die in a test mission off camera, which of course he didn't. He never could have.
Fake news, conspiracy.
And he's, kidnapped by the aliens, wherever he is. I see a version of that movie that could be Top Gun Maverick. That could be Will Smith's, not just big audience blockbuster, but also we love him so much he's getting a Best Actor nomination.
Well, the issue with, Top Gun Maverick was a drama. It was a very grounded and real world, non-fantastical drama. That, because it also played to audiences that didn't go to the movies all that much, and played to Tom Cruise fans, and played to Top Gun fans, and general tentpole fans, compared to a stereotypical blockbuster of that moment in time, it kind of played like a prestige picture, which is part of why it was so popular. Regardless of whether it's possible to do that, I don't know how you make an alien invasion spectacular that also has the quasi real world, I don't want to say grittiness, because Top Gun Maverick is not a gritty movie, but it has a certain level-headedness that made Maverick stand out among, alongside the Minions and Jurassic World and Marvel movies. That being said, could he make an Independence Day 3 that ignores part 2, that it is, if it's any good, it is successful? Maybe. I was the idiot that thought part 2 would be successful because I really liked White House Down. So I figured, there was always the idea of, if you make an Independence Day 2 that was actually about the idea, make it a 9/11 parable, where it's 20 years after 9/11, and this entire generation that spent all their time, all their resources into preventing keeping themselves safe at the expense of blood and treasure and discovery and everything else. What did we get out of this?
Right.
And then the aliens come back and they do it all again. And it's like, what the hell was that all for?
Right. Right.
There is that you could make that movie if you wanted to.
And there's your Oscar Top Gun Maverick version of the Independence Day franchise. I think that's, to me, other than Men in Black, I do think that is kind of the most beloved IP that Will Smith has. I do think there's a version of that.
Because his other films, even the ones that were franchises, they were intended to be one and done pictures. I, Robot was not supposed to be the start of the franchise. It was just one movie.
Yeah.
And obviously the same thing with Hitch, Pursuit of Happiness, I Am Legend. He dies in the theatrical cut of I Am Legend. So if he's back in the sequel, that'll be really weird. It's probably one of the first times where you have a sequel that, is based off the, director's cut of a movie that most people did not see. To use the obvious example, that would be like making a Justice League 2, but you absolutely have to have seen the Zack Snyder version to understand what the hell is going on.
Yeah.
But that being said, the question for Will Smith is because, again, in 2008, he makes £7. It is received as a flop. I mean, that was my first year of writing regularly. Even I was like, this film's doing fine for what it is, but whatever. He goes away for 4 years. He takes care of his kids. He has a life. And then he comes back with Men in Black 3, which wasn't super profitable because it cost a lot and everybody got profit participation points. Him, Tommy Lee Jones, Barry Sonnenfeld. I forget which of the Barrys it is. Sonnenfeld.
It's Sonnenfeld got paid on that one. Yeah. Yeah. Levinson didn't make anything off.
But it still made $650 million worldwide.
Yeah.
And it was incredibly successful. But then after that, he really never has another non-franchise, non-IP hit ever again, with the slight exception of Focus, which was an R-rated comedy con artist dramedy, very good by the way, with Margot Robbie. It makes 150 on a 50 budget, and we all think, oh, maybe that's the start of something, but it's not. Collateral Beauty bombs, the Gemini Man bombs, Spies in Disguise bombs. King Richard, I would have been bullish on that in more conventional circumstances because maybe that is a marquee character, but it bombed obviously. So he's in a situation where if he is in an established franchise like Men in Black or Bad Boys, he is still worth his weight in gold.
Right. Or what about Aladdin 2?
Well,
I mean, is that happening?
If he's in a major A+ added value element in Aladdin or Suicide Squad, he is worth his weight in gold. Right. And how do we know that? Because what happens when you make an Independence Day without Will Smith? What happens when you make a Men in Black without Will Smith? What happens when you make a Suicide Squad without Will Smith?
Yep.
And that is why I was bearish on the Suicide Squad. 3 years before it came out, and I obviously the discourse doesn't matter that much, but it was very frustrating. I mean, it was even very frustrating a couple weeks ago where, movies like Furiosa, where I wrote 4 years ago why it was going to bomb. And in this case, I was dead on. But yet the discourse wasn't, oh, well, this bombed because of this reason. It's theatrical is doomed. American audiences are stupid. Why don't they go see this prequel reboot that it's again, the same people that are saying that IP for the sake of IP, prequels, reboots, whatever, are destroying Hollywood. But when one comes out that they like and bombs, now it's what's wrong with American moviegoers.
Right. I mean, it's always that thing of it's the audience's fault for not understanding why this was actually great. And that's not the case because they're the ones buying the ticket.
I do tend to blame the audience for not showing up for non-franchise films.
Right. But Furiosa is a situation where I think people have decided over the course of 40 years that we like this IP a little bit.
Well, yes. Yeah. And I think Mad Max Fury Road is very much a internet property. People love talking about it on the internet. They love acting as if it was one of the hugest blockbusters to ever, play in theaters. And the facts are it's not. And I think that's the thing is like a lot of that fandom lives on the internet, and the people in the real world didn't want Furiosa for the myriad reasons that Scott has laid out.
I mean, aside from the whole, it's another Solo, it's another Lightyear situation. It would basically be like after No Time to Die, Sony or MGM goes and spends $170 million on a prequel origin story for Paloma, which does not star Ana de Armas.
Yes, that is so dead on.
You nailed it.
The prequelness of it was what was especially bananas, because there's of course a logic to coming off of Fury Road, doing a sequel with Charlize, and even that is iffy because, like I said, Fury Road wasn't the giant hit that everyone thought it was. But
it also was not a fun movie to make.
Right, she probably never wants to see George Miller again, but that has some logic to it. The prequel to a side character And I mean, you invoked Lightyear, and as much of a tank job as Lightyear was, Furiosa would kill to have done as well as Lightyear did. I mean, Lightyear, what
Yes.
did it do? Like 120 all in domestic
Yeah, it
in
did
the end?
225 worldwide, which
I
I
mean,
mean, yeah,
Furiosa's
Furiosa's
going to
probably going
cap
to end up
out
with around 160-ish, give or take.
worldwide. I mean, domestic, does it hit 70
Yes,
at this point?
Yeah, probably around 75, 80.
Wow.
And what was frustrating, and again, discourse this, discourse that, is that, and this is something that I noticed like right before COVID, which is that there's this weird, when a movie that people like or they think other people should like flops, first they're in denial because, every movie they love that underwhelms is going to be the next Greatest Showman. And now it's the next Elemental.
Right.
And then they make up these cockamamie ridiculous reasons why it flopped, other than legitimate reasons that the audience didn't want it. Or like the example I first started to notice this was Birds of Prey, which I loved. I love Birds of Prey. Great fucking movie. But I warned them in 2018 not to do an R rating. Because A, you leave out the young Harley Quinn superhero fans, and B, most female-centric action pictures like Resident Evil, like Underworld, like Atomic Blonde are R-rated movies. So you were not standing out from the back.
Right.
Artistically, it was the right call, but commercially, it was, it was almost suicidal.
Right.
And also, don't call it Birds of Prey, because that is such
you call it Harley Quinn and the Birds of Prey.
Yeah, because nobody knows Birds of Prey unless you are a hardcore comic book fan, which we know there are so few of those.
And it's you have the discourse and the narrative that somehow the film flopped because the Snyder cult review bombed it, or like, you do realize that these people don't exist in the real world. I would love to talk to people who watched the Oscars in 2022 that did not live online and ask them what they thought, what the hell was going on when a scene from a Justice League movie that they barely remember or didn't see, but a scene that they didn't recognize, won something called Best Cheer Moment at the Oscars 5 years after it came out in theaters.
I really love, though, what you have pointed out here, Scott, which is these stages of denial that people go through after a movie they love bombs. And I almost feel like we're the people who need to develop some kind of therapeutic program for these moviegoers. But we've got to the stages. There's denial. There's, of course, anger. There is then, of course, tweeting.
Yep.
And I think
it's like, it might have legs.
It might have.
Yes, if it has Aladdin legs, it's still going to flop. Sorry.
Right.
I did the math.
Yeah. We need Scott Mendelson to sit down with these people and they're going through it. I mean, this is of course a true psychiatric condition that people do go through, but you need to sit there with them and explain to them why this is not a Puss in Boots 2 situation. This is not a Greatest Showman situation. It's not going to happen. And it's not because people are bad. It's not because people are attacking you. And you've got to sit there.
I don't care if they're attacking me. That's, it's
let them know that it's not society attacking them. That Furiosa bombed.
Well, no, it's I made this as almost a joke in the post a couple weeks ago after. It's like, the box office. Yes, there can be some correlation between quality and commercial success, but good movies bomb all the time.
Right.
Especially in the last decade, where more and more movies are that, this isn't worth seeing in theaters to most moviegoers.
Right.
I used to do an annual thing called, the 10 best movies you missed. I don't do it anymore because most people miss most movies.
Right. The good movies that people caught would be a shorter list at this point.
Exactly. But, it's like when Barack Obama, when he was selling the Affordable Care Act in 2020, paraphrase that, if you liked Furiosa, you can keep liking Furiosa. The fact that it did terrible in theatrical revenue does not negate your enjoyment of it.
Right.
I love Speed Racer. I don't expect to see Speed Racer 2 anytime soon. I don't take that personally.
Right.
But it does speak to the importance of box office as much as people want to act like box office does not play a part in the culture. We obviously know differently.
Mhm.
But yeah, the fact that people take personal offense when a movie doesn't make as much money, it is another thing that is it's like, well, money doesn't equal quality and money doesn't equal what people actually want. But it's like, but then when your movie bombs that you love, it does mean everything. So I mean, there's hypocrites in every level of society, but it just shows why this is so important, box office and what it
Right.
means to people.
And I think, Clayton, these are people who don't have the therapy they need right now. They don't have access to Scott Mendelson, and they lay on a couch and Scott Mendelson starts telling them box office numbers that then calm them down. I mean, if I was only 9 years old at the time, but if I was, an adult box office fan in 1990 when Goodfellas came out and, made only 45 million at the box office, I too would have been one of those people who was.
That was actually a pretty good result for a Scorsese picture back then.
That's
that
true.
was considered a hit, 52 in 1990. I mean, he didn't, with the exception of Cape Fear, which was, a thriller, he didn't start making successes until he teamed up with DiCaprio.
See, and this is the kind of therapy that I would have needed then, or that someone then who would have been freaking out. Why did you all sleep on this? The great Martin Scorsese.
For me, it was Mars Attacks. That took me a minute to not take that personally.
Right.
Because I liked it and, I thought it was going to be a huge hit. And nobody cared.
Nobody.
Well, to defend Pat and his, because obviously, Scott, you did come in and, tell Pat what's what when it comes to Goodfellas.
Which I needed. That's a therapy I needed.
But for Italians, Goodfellas is like Star Wars. So if he was expecting Star Wars type box office from it, and that's why at that young age he was devastated.
I had the action figures.
Mm-hmm.
I had the Tommy DeVito action figure. So, I expected him to do Han Solo numbers. Of course, Han Solo from the original series.
Have a piece of the skull that comes out this way?
We couldn't even give the action figure an open casket.
Very sad.
Yeah, it was very sad. It was a very sad day. So, basically, when you're looking at the starts of the summer, I think you're already talking everyone down from that narrative that started when Fall Guy underperformed, when Furiosa underperformed, that it's theatrical is over. And I'm taking it, you're not seeing it that way. It's more that Fall Guy and Furiosa just were not the movies that were going to click to that level.
Yes. And there are two somewhat contradictory narratives at play. First, this summer was always going to be abysmal because a handful of A-level tentpoles or potentially A-level tentpoles ended up getting delayed to 2025. And what was left were, I would argue, B-level tentpoles at best. But I would argue that looking at the slate, it was always possible that most of the films that would open would perform at a level they specifically needed for success on their own micro terms. And so far, we're 6 weeks into the summer. The two sequels have done well, relatively speaking. The prequel that nobody wanted has done poorly. Again, there's precedent for that. And forgive me, I'm calling Fall Guy an original here, even though it's very loosely based on a TV show.
Right.
The two originals, If and Fall Guy, are dealing with the same challenges that that originals or new to you adaptations have been dealing with for the last 8 or 9 years.
Right.
But here's what I didn't expect. We have seen spectacular legs from almost every summer release other than Furiosa.
Yes. Yes.
Fall Guy is at 85. It's already tripled its opening weekend. It's not done yet. It's probably going to cross 90 domestic. Which, by the way, tracking or not, 33 and a half for an original live action kid fantasy is pretty freaking terrific. I was very annoyed at how that narrative, okay, it didn't make 40, probably because the reviews weren't very good. These things happen. But that is well on its way to tripling its opening weekend. It's going to cross 100. It's going to probably come in within $10 million of what Free Guy did in North America. And I would argue Free Guy was a much more conventionally commercial picture.
Yep.
Now, does that mean it's going to be profitable in theaters? No, because ironically, neither film are doing very well overseas. Now, you can argue these are the kind of films that have often struggled overseas. They're America focused with American movie stars and
Mhm.
yada, yada, yada.
Right.
But the answer, oh no, what's wrong with American moviegoers? American moviegoers are showing up. And what's
Mhm.
great and very promising is they're showing up in weekends 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Right.
Yeah.
Which we've seen that on and off since COVID, frankly, where like F9 was like the leggiest Fast and Furious sequel since the second Fast and Furious sequel,
Mhm.
or since the first Fast and Furious sequel.
Well, we're not getting those $100 million opening weekends as often. So they're staying steady after these smaller openings, which is how movies used to be. I mean, that is
I think
pre-Marvel-ish, right? That was just what movies would
the
open
thing with
big.
Marvel is they kind of perfected the breakout sequel as an assembly line, as part of their assembly line.
Mhm.
So you would get the kind of upswing that for a follow-up that was not super rare, but something of oh wow, good for the Bourne Supremacy, or good for the Dark Knight, or John Wick 2, or Pitch Perfect 2, or Austin Powers 2, and they kind of like did that on a pretty consistent level for 10 years.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's impressive. Well,
And
the thing with the Garfield though, like when you're talking about something like Garfield, which is having massive pause here, is that there's no reason to run out and see Garfield first
correct.
weekend. It's not like at the end there's going to be a stinger where Opus from Bloom County shows up. Like there's not that sort of thing that you're like, well, I don't want to miss that. I don't want to be spoiled on that. So I think that's also all of these movies, is that there's no difference between going to the first weekend and the second or third weekend for a lot of people for these movies, because they just don't need to prioritize that.
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm really curious to see what Garfield does these next few weeks, honestly, because I got a report just today from a wannabe mom who said that she was taking her two children to see Garfield today, and basically school's out, which I mean that's going to help this movie. First day that our kids were out from school, and she also was shocked that they knew who Garfield was. That is part of the reason why they waited so long. Is she was blown away, like literally blown away when she asked them, "Do you know who Garfield is?" And they shot back at her. He eats lasagna. He hates Mondays, and he's mean to Odie. They knew the entire Garfield thing,
And that's it. That's the thing.
and that was a thing. And she was gobsmacked, and then took him to Garfield. I think a lot of parents are going to have that situation where they're just shocked that their kids know Garfield, and it's going to take 3 weeks for them to figure that out.
Yeah, and that's and I'll be honest, I wasn't sure to what extent that would break out for exactly that reason. I mean, the live action Garfield movies were 20 years ago.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
But obviously there is some pop culture osmosis in a way that there isn't for G.I. Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of post-credit cookies that are supposed to get the fans excited, I took my I think it was 12-year-old to Rise of the Beasts. He likes Transformers. The movie was fine. But when the kid, Anthony Ramos flips over that business card and says G.I. Joe, Ethan had no idea what he was referring to.
Mhm.
None.
That was one of the sadder cinematic moments I've ever seen, is the reveal of them trying to get a G.I. Joe crossover off the ground, and the degree to which no one cared is maybe the most I've ever seen no one care in human history.
It would have been great if Anthony Ramos's character said, "No, I'm good," and then just walked away.
Yeah.
And he's walking away, and then and then they open that, and you see the thing, and everybody's just sad. Everybody just is like, "Oh man, another one."
All the Joes are like, he didn't like. No,
Flint throws his wrench down.
Yeah. That was pretty rough, but that is not how kids are reacting to Garfield. They know that he is mean to Odie, which is a plus, apparently.
Yes.
Knowing Odie is so surprising to me. That was a pool that I did not expect.
Yes. I didn't confirm whether they had previous knowledge of John Arbuckle, though. Do
they know normal?
I don't know if they would, but they knew the big three. They knew the lasagna, the Mondays.
Normal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The true one, the true heads.
So I think one thing to its credit is, while the Garfield movie, there is a little bit of an origin story in there, it's not an origin story in terms of feature length. It's not a giant prequel to see how Garfield came to be the one you know and love. He's Garfield by the end of the first 10 minutes or so.
Right. Right.
We can always learn from that. You can't do the movie that sets up the actual what this character is that we know,
Yeah.
because you can't assume there's going to be interest in that.
So Scott, you would say they would have made a mistake had the Garfield movie been about Garfield's parents meeting and the movie ends with the birth of Garfield. That would have been not what
Well, it'd be Garfield's mom saying, "I'm pregnant," and you don't even get to see Garfield.
So Garfield 2.
Are you referring to a very specific movie that came out earlier this year?
I am not, but whatever
that's
that
basically
is,
Madam Web.
Oh my God, that is Madam Web. Yes, that is. Yeah, if Garfield had went the Madam Web route,
it's like
Madam
Web isn't even like the origin story for the superheroes. It's the prequel to the origin story for the superheroes.
It's the story that shows you that they didn't get killed before they someday become superheroes.
Yes.
So Garfield not doing that is good.
No,
a movie about trying
to kill 195. It should be over under 250 by the time it's done on a 60 budget, and that's
great.
Sony is they may win by default just by getting all their runners on base at a reasonable budget.
Well, saying on Sony, we're going to get inside out in a minute, but let's talk the news that broke today. Sony purchased the Alamo Drafthouse chain of movie theaters. This is pretty huge. I mean, is this the first time? I mean, obviously there was a law that ended in 2020.
I think it's the first time since the Paramount decrees were rendered null and void in late 2019. So there was no rush to do this.
Right.
I'll be honest. I mean, it's encouraging just because any theaters that are in good financial hands is good news. I mean, it's 35 theaters nationwide. So it's not like, it's not like they're buying Cinemark.
Right.
And from what I've heard, and this is, it might just be sort of a prestige outlet for them to push Crunchyroll stuff.
Okay.
Along with whatever else. And again, I don't know. They may just run it as a normal theater that shows Sony movies and everything else.
Right.
But I do think it's interesting. But again, I think it's one of those things that's going to be more talked about than actually having a huge impact. Like, Amazon buying MGM.
Right.
Which is like, everybody was like, the sky is falling. It's like, look, I'm 44 years old right now. For the first 42, 43 of those years, I don't ever remember a time where MGM wasn't either about to go bankrupt or trying to get sold. So,
right.
But Sony purchasing a theater chain makes sense because they don't have a streamer. So it makes sense that they would want to invest in the success of theatrical pictures that then make a lot of money there, are broadcast all over and advertised all over, so that when they drop on Netflix with that lucrative deal, they do Bafo Streamo. So the fact that Sony is buying a theatrical chain, I think, is a really good fit.
Yeah. And, it's I don't know how that's going to work in terms of, when they play a Disney movie, I assume they send half back to Disney like it's a normal, like it's an AMC, but maybe when they play a Sony movie, they keep all the money. I don't know. I should call and ask, but whatever. I don't think that might not get ironed out for a while anyway.
Right. But they keep all the French fry money that they don't have.
Yes. Well, that's what matters.
Yeah. It's interesting in the sense that Sony knows the other side of this, and they feel confident enough in the viability of theatrical that they're putting their money where their mouth is. You would think if a studio did fully believe, this House of Cards is going to fall, they wouldn't put any money into being a distributor. So I think it's if nothing else, a good sign for theatrical. It'd be obviously a worse sign if no one wanted this theater chain and they slowly went out of business.
Yeah.
By default, it is better for theatrical for Sony to buy 36 theaters than it would have been for Sony to buy a movie studio.
Yes, the Paramount deal. So Paramount, is that closed? Are they being bought, or now that's being hung up?
We all thought it was going to be Skydance and they were going to come in and swoop in like heroes, and that is not happening, and we don't know what's going to happen next. They could limp along accordingly. They could get bought by, private equity firm with all the
Mhm.
fun that entails. They could still get bought by, Warner Brothers Discovery or whatever. I mean,
Right, right,
what's another 50 billion in debt? Who cares?
right,
It's not
Mhm.
real
right,
money.
right. Yeah, Warner Brothers, they at this point act like my dad used to at the bodega, which is to just keep putting things on a bill. And eventually, I mean, maybe eventually Warner Brothers will pass on before they have to pay anything.
Mhm.
So if so, that's a good strategy for them. Work for him. Maybe it'll work for Warner Brothers. But I feel like them buying Paramount is a stretch at
Yeah,
this
and
point.
I think some of that is just when we talk about the M&A conversation, I would argue a lot of that is just chitter chatter amongst people that would profit very much from that happening, just trying to stir the pot and make their random speculation into concrete news.
Mhm,
Like, was
mhm.
Apple really ever remotely interested in buying Disney, or we just pretend they were because people that would have made a lot of money from that, kept talking to reporters and pundits to say this is about to happen.
Mhm,
Mhm.
mhm.
I think there's a lot of that. Just like, when a movie gets announced that we know isn't really going to happen, and it's mostly just, an agent getting their client out there and yada, yada, yada.
Right, right.
Um,
Is that what we still think Thunderbolts is? Or is that actually a real movie? Are they gonna make
apparently they're
Florence Pugh so she's
Julia
gotta
Louis
go through
Dreyfus
with this?
wouldn't lie to me.
Wow. I mean, that's true. If she says it, then I finally
Yeah.
believe it. So, okay. But Thunderbolts really feels like the all-time announced, but no one actually has intention of making it movie.
Well,
But someday,
Blade.
Blade is the one, yeah.
Blade is the one. Blade is the one.
I
Yeah.
mean, Blade, by the time they get to that, if they get to that, he will be old enough to play Whistler.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah. He will. Yeah.
And again, I don't make movies, so there's lots of sausage that I'm not privy to in terms of that.
Mhm.
But how hard is it to write a script about a half human, half vampire that kills vampires during the night? And this latest pack of vampires is giving him a problem because XYZ.
Right.
Mhm.
They pulled off 3 of those pretty easily back in the 90s and early 2000s. I don't know why we don't have the technology to do it 20 years later.
Just
But
rip off 30 Days of Night and just put them in Alaska. There
put
we
them in
go.
Alaska.
That's actually
Yeah.
a good idea.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Copyright BO Boys and
yeah.
the Tribal Chief. Yeah.
And I was not even in the shower or on the toilet.
Well, we can't see his lower half, so that's not confirmed, even if you're watching on the BO Boys YouTube channel. So
it reminds me of the development process for the Freddy versus Jason movie. And there's a book about this called Slash of the Titans that just details the 15 years of these, just whether they're good or bad, not for me to say, these incredibly labyrinth and complicated and mythology rich scripts that they just finally settled on. Freddy brings Jason back to life so that the Elm Street kids will think it's Freddy and believe in him again. Okay, go picture, go make that.
Scott, would you believe that I've read all 400 plus pages of that book?
Of what?
Of that book. I've read Slash of the Titans. Cover to cover. Yes. It was fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't even really like Freddy versus Jason all that much. I like that it exists. I'm like that it was a success, but I mean, but I do think it's funny that at the very least they said, you know what? Nobody cares about the plot. They're here for the 2 characters. They want to see them crack wise and kill people with a little bit more money than we're used to spending on these pictures. The rest will take care of itself.
And it did. It was a big hit.
Yeah.
So speaking of possibly a big hit, let's get into what's opening this Father's Day weekend, and Inside Out 2 coming out for Pixar. And I'm going to throw this at you, Scott. Heading into Bad Boys weekend, Clayton and I were theorizing that if that would have failed, Will Smith would have been in legitimately trouble. If that would opens to 20 million or something. And we were putting out there, Will Smith could end up in Mel Gibson land, straight to DVD, filmed in Croatia, action flicks. He's there with Chad Michael Murray. And thank God that didn't happen.
And he's been doing that for like 10 years. So it always drives me nuts when you see people saying, blah, blah, blah. But Mel Gibson still gets to make movies. Like,
he's in Croatia. We sent him to Croatia.
Not quite the same thing.
Yeah. He was sentenced to
Or like,
Croatia.
when Kevin Spacey books some random voiceover role in some European movie that nobody's going to see. It's like, that's not really a comeback.
Right.
No.
So Will Smith avoided that. I think something similar is on the line for Pixar here, where if Inside Out, and I think we're all going to agree it's probably not going to happen, but if Inside Out 2 were to bomb, it's the Mel Gibson version of animation, where Pixar really does start to slide into filming everything Croatia territory, becomes a straight to DVD arm of Disney. I think that's what's on the line here. I think we'll all probably agree that's not going to happen. But Scott, set it up for us. Do you think that there is a huge existential risk for Pixar this weekend based on this opening?
Well, I don't think it's going to open particularly poorly. So it's and I'm in the minority, but I frankly didn't like it.
Inside Out 2
I
did not
thought
like
it
it.
was
Wow.
very much a film scared of its own shadow and trying not to get attacked from any particular direction by being too specific in any particular way. If anything, it's almost a metaphor for that.
Okay.
Also, it's and this is the movie's about anxiety, and there's huge chunks of the movie that if you don't like cringe, you're going to be watching it like this for like the entire film.
Okay.
Like, oh, I don't even want to see this. This is because we like Riley and we want her to be happy, and a huge chunk of the film is her, being embarrassing and humiliating and awkward and it's not fun.
Okay. So it's like a season 4 of The Office, but as a Pixar
something
movie.
Like that.
Yeah.
But even that, I mean, and again, I'll be honest, I never watched The Office, but I assume in the beginning, at least, you were supposed to be allowed to laugh at these people.
I've never watched The American Office either, but I assume too that it is hard to watch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is, and again, it was unpleasant to watch.
Yeah.
But whatever, most of the other critics seem to enjoy it, and I don't know what regular audiences will think.
Well, I mean, what do you think kids? I mean, did it feel like a kids movie to you? Did it feel like
I am so glad I didn't take my 2 older kids, not because it was like dark or violent or scary or anything, but because they would have absolutely spent the entire movie hiding under their chair waiting for it to end. Because it's so cringy in that sense.
Wow.
Now, would that be relatability that you would think they would cringe about, that they've related to experiences, or that they think the movie and the way they're portraying it is cringy?
I think it's perfectly relatable, but it's just not fun.
This is my worst fear with this movie. This is my big criticism with Pixar, is that it's for middle-aged men and they don't understand what kids want. I was on a plane during my hiatus where Pat was talking about kicking my head around. I don't know if you know about this, Scott, but it was very controversial around these parts.
Yeah, Clayton missed 2 episodes and I tried to recast him, but
so basically, that's a summation of it. But I was on many a plane and there was many a child watching Migration, a movie that we thought was, who's going to want to watch a movie about birds that no one knows about? There's no existing IP. But Migration ended up being like a healthy, leggy movie.
It was also cheap.
And that's the thing. This Pixar movie is expensive. It's about, like, it's not for kids. And that is the problem with Pixar movies, is that, especially these new ones, is that they're not for kids. That's my fear here.
I do think something that Pixar has generally done well in good times and bad is they understand that the movies are for kids, in that they don't pander to adults in the way that we think of like pop culture references or recognizable music tunes or, zany antic comedy or whatever. They are for kids. It's just, they don't talk down to them, and, adults can enjoy them. And if the movie is good, my kids loved Soul. That is a film that is very much a film about an adult's midlife journey.
Dead jazz
ironically,
musician,
I would say most Illumination films are grounded midlife crisis comedies.
Okay.
Most, Sing, Despicable Me, Migration, those are basically about middle-aged men coming to terms with what did or didn't work out in their life, and trying to figure out if there is a way to get to what they actually wanted.
Right. I mean, what are the minions if not toxic masculinity, come to life? and they know it and we know
Well, they
it.
would have
so
worked
we
for
love it.
Hitler if they weren't encased in ice.
Right. I mean, as we're led to believe, the minions say, and we'll believe them on that. It's the convenient story
is that
to be on.
flashback an unreliable narrator?
I mean, listen, a lot of people said they were encased in ice in the 1940s, and
Yeah.
you know, we'll take your word for it, great grandpa.
I mean, it still doesn't explain, like, Cambodia or
yeah.
Putin's Russia. We know who they'd vote for.
Yeah, the minions have a lot to answer for, but yeah, it's exactly very adult themes. But Pixar, you said they've been able to walk the line, make it still kid stuff. But if Inside Out 2, it'll open. But if the word gets out that this isn't fun, when you're in the marketplace with Garfield, which is fun, and Minions, which is
in the minority, and B, there's been many a time where I have seen a quote unquote family film where the critics, the ones that didn't like it as much as I did, that's it's too dark, it's too scary, kids won't like this. And I was like, I saw it with my kid and he liked it just fine, or that she liked it just fine. And which I don't know if you've seen If, but it's a very melancholy picture.
I have seen If, and it was very downbeat. And Ryan Reynolds,
yet it's leggy as hell.
Yeah,
kids are responding to it.
Yeah,
I think because it doesn't talk down to them.
Yeah, listen, I took my 2 nieces, and they did not seem to be enjoying it during. And I asked them afterwards, and they liked that there was a ladybug in it. And sometimes that's all you need is a talking ladybug, and they'll have liked this boring movie where Ryan Reynolds doesn't really do much.
Yeah. So the thing with, let me ask you, because you've seen this movie and the embargo has been lifted, right? People were worried because there were not early reviews on this. They were really holding it off, which made people think that this was going to be a bad movie. Now,
will admit I was concerned, but to be fair, they took Elemental to Cannes last year and got caught in the Indiana Jones crossfire.
Yes, that was that was bad, and they're smart. And listen, I'll give them props where they deserve props. That was smart to not make the same mistake. Now, I've been talking about Ennui, this character Ennui. I've been saying Ennui, it's going to be Ennui fever. Kids are going to have Ennui on their pillowcases. And I was going to ask, you have seen this film. Will Ennui be the big breakout kids film star of this summer, or no?
I don't think so. She's honestly, other than anxiety, most of the new emotions are mostly in the background.
Okay. Oh, wow.
And that's not a criticism. That's the story they're telling. And as far as, I don't know how regular audiences will respond to this one. Because, just because I didn't like it doesn't mean that they're not going to like it. Sometimes I'm ahead of, I don't want to say ahead of a curve. That makes me sound obnoxious. But, I disliked Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning before it was cool.
Yes.
And famous. Sometimes I'm not in the majority, and that's fine.
I will never forget the moment when we had done a recording just like this, and then the recording ends, and then you tell us, you're like, this is between us, because the embargo hadn't lifted yet, and you knew this was going to strike fear into our hearts, and you said, Dead Reckoning is not good.
Yeah,
is not good. I will never forget that moment.
I remember. I'm reliving it right now.
Yeah,
it's an A on Cinema Score, so I don't think the people that saw it necessarily thought that it was aggressively terrible or anything. I just think it played in retrospect enough as this used to be an event, but now it's just another one of these of the week, like Indiana Jones, like The Flash, like Transformers, that there was enough of a downturn, along with, the Barbenheimer thing sucking all the oxygen out of the room. So I'll be curious to see how Part 8 does comparatively, because I assume they will open it in a place where there's a bit more breathing room.
Yeah, not the weekend before it loses all its IMAXs. Yeah. Far away from Nolan. So is there any nightmare scenario for Inside Out 2? Like, is there any chance where this gets
the nightmare scenario is that it opens with around closer to $60 million with bad reviews, which already hasn't happened. So the reviews are good.
Right.
And I I've said this elsewhere, and I think it's worth, if the reviews are good, if the multiplier is strong over the weekend, and if the
Mhm.
cinema score and post track and all that stuff are positive, even an opening weekend like 65, 75 million, I wouldn't panic
Okay. Okay.
because we've seen long legs this summer.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
as you said, that isn't, I mean, having seen it, I can tell you right now, it's not a movie you're going to have, jaw-dropping spoilers that you're going to have to worry about seeing right away.
Okay.
So if there are people that are only casually curious that might wait till the July 4th weekend, more power to them.
Okay. So it's not like there's a big cameo where Harry Styles shows up as a new emotion.
See,
in
and
the
that
trailer.
is the
Yeah.
biggest. We talked about people not giving a crap for a post-credit scene. Eternals takes the cake
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
because
That-
not only
that's
was
all
that nobody cared, everyone was confused
Yes.
because those were such neat. I mean, even I had no idea who they were.
It's the double whammy of a stinger that causes apathy and confusion all
Yes.
at once. That's pretty incredible. I'm gonna, just throw out an example of the marketing on this movie. I got another Rats on the Ground report from a different wannabe mom reached out to me about Inside Out. This is how it went down for her buying her ticket is her child got sick at daycare. Child proceeds to get her sick. So she is just a complete physical wreck. Just the toilet is destroyed.
Mm.
And
Mm.
then because of that, she didn't want to make dinner. She takes her child, gets McDonald's. The child who had previously no Inside Out awareness sees the branding of the characters on the McDonald's bags and the burger wrappers and everything. Because of that, I got to see Inside Out 2. They buy tickets for this weekend to see Inside Out 2. I mean, that is just the perfect circle of rat getting someone sick, sickness causing branding leading to a ticket sale. And that's kind of what makes me really bullish on this movie is they're getting the branding out there. These sick rats are seeing these McDonald's wrappers with ennui, with envy, all of that, and they want to see it. They're responding to the hamburger wrappers.
Yeah, I mean that's raising awareness, and I think that's of the many positive things about the long legs that we've slightly smaller openings but longer legs that we've seen this summer is that the awareness that is so hard to create because again people don't see non-tentpole movies in theaters, so you don't get the trailers, they don't watch as much linear television, so you don't get the TV spots, and they don't read magazines and newspapers, so you don't get the print ads.
Mm-hmm.
So if the awareness is coming slower, even if it's just word of mouth from somebody who's more in the know than you are,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're still willing to go see the movie in weekend 3, 4, and 5,
Mm-hmm.
that will mitigate some of the problem that now exists in terms of creating awareness for non-tentpole films.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, with the expense now, fast food, like you were saying, McDonald's is more expensive than it was when we were kids. So it's not the everyday thing for families. So there's families that might not have this McDonald's trip until next week. And then the rat is clamoring to see Inside Out too. So, I mean, you got to think of those things as well.
Right. Yeah, you've got to leave the branding on the Happy Meals longer than you used to because it's taking longer to get to them. Yes, 100%. Yet the awareness for this is high. I mean, let's get into our number predictions for this. The first one did 90 million. Is there any chance that Inside Out 2 is bigger? Is there an element to this, Scott, that you could see pushing this higher? Is there a value add or something in the marketplace that makes you think this one could be even bigger than the one that came out in 2015? Or at least in the opening. We're only worrying about the opening weekend. Is there a scenario where this does triple digits or at least does 91?
At a glance, I would say we're probably looking at an opening over under what the first one did, inflation notwithstanding. Because I would argue it is less an event than it was 9 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
A, Pixar is less of a theatrical mega brand, and B, and this is something that felled Furiosa, frankly, the idea of this big, splashy, mega budget Hollywood fantasy film that happens to be, female fronted is less of a big deal with all the free media that implies than it was 9 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's just a movie to a certain extent.
Right. It's not an event.
That being
just for
said, if
that.
the
Yeah.
interest is there, then that's a minor problem.
Mm-hmm.
But since 2021, let's say, there have been a lot of franchises that have opened bigger than their predecessors and have outgrossed their predecessors.
Mm-hmm.
Doctor Strange, Thor, John Wick, Creed, Scream, Spider-Verse,
Right.
a bunch of others I'm probably forgetting, to be honest, because most of the previously reliable franchise films that have had an installment offered up amid COVID have performed better than the respective predecessor.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the ones that crashed and burned. I mean, even Ant-Man and the Wasp, it opened to 110. It just was a terrible movie.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the Marvels, okay, that was a weird situation, but
Yeah.
that was a Murphy's Law. But that's even something like Aquaman. Those are the exceptions to the rule. Thus far, the well-liked follow-up to the well-liked franchise, which so far Inside Out is both. Because again, I didn't like it, but I'm in the minority, and that's fine.
Right.
They should open very well.
Now,
does that mean it's going to do 100 where the first one did 90? I don't know, but because I do think we did, not to be crude about it, but 1.2 million people died in a global pandemic over the last 4 years, and for every one person that died, there's probably 3 to 5 would-be general moviegoers that, for one reason or another, economics, health, general malaise, that aren't as psyched to see the new big Pixar movie or the new, superhero whatever as they were in 2018.
Wow. That is a stat that we don't bring up enough when we talk about
I bring it up as
box
often as
office.
possible, even though I feel bad doing it, because you don't want to talk about 1 million people dying in terms of, oh no, the blockbuster movie didn't open as well as it should have.
Right.
But
right.
that's a variable.
We
It's a
deal
huge
in
variable.
we deal in numbers, and we deal in demographics, and we deal in facts, and those are facts.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right. And if I'm a movie fan, listen, I want to be counted, as I would have went to Inside Out too, so I think we honor people when we take this into account. So there is that scenario where it could go over 90. And none of the star power in this probably increases it. I don't think Amy Poehler or anyone's a higher profile part of the cast than she was in the first one. They added Iowa Debris, and she's great, but I don't know if necessarily she's going to bring more ticket sales here. Bill Hader didn't join this one, but that doesn't matter at all. So yeah,
he got lowballed. I believe he got lowballed with with his money, and he decided smartly to not be disrespected.
There you go.
Yeah. So yeah, I see very little reason for concern.
Okay.
And again, my only concern is if the general audience doesn't like it that much more than I do.
Right.
But we won't know until we know.
Right. And even that is probably more of a weekend 2 or 3 problem.
Yes. Of course.
The opening weekend
is about marketing, awareness, interest, hype, all that jazz, while every weekend after that is generally about quality. Does this movie work? And obviously that's fluctuated over the years, as with the shrinking windows and the emphasis on opening weekend and yada yada yada. Although again, and I think I'm not a big fan of the shrinking windows, just on principle. But we see time and time and time again that it does not impact legs for films that are otherwise doing well in theaters. And again, I think there's a lot of bad information out there. When people talk about The Fall Guy, they act as if Universal was going to let it run in just theaters for 90 days, but it did badly in theaters, so they're going to put it out on PVOD on day 19. It's like, that's not what happened.
Is there anything too? Because I've seen this theory put out there a lot. I think by a mutual of ours, the ace Eric Weber, who's been on this show. We all know him, and he's a big proponent of theatrical windows are really affecting box office. And part of that theory is there's people who know eventually it'll be on PVOD. So I'm just not going to go. Something like Fall Guy, that impacts the opening weekend. that impacts the second weekend, not just like the weekend that it's on PVOD, but the weekends prior where people are just set up. If I wait a week or two, it'll be there. Now, Scott, throwing that to you. Of course, it's a theory that's out there. Do you
I
think
mean,
that has an effect?
right now, I don't think it's hurting. Again, it's not hurting the already successful films.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And I think for the films that are not successful, it might be providing a financial lifeline for
mm-hmm,
the very kind of films that have been struggling in theaters since 2016, including
mm-hmm.
films like The Fall Guy, frankly.
Okay.
That's a situation where you might argue that Universal pulled the trigger on that at that budget with that cast because there was PVOD revenue that they could kind of sort of count on to make up at least some of the theatrical shortfall.
Okay.
That's speculation.
Right.
Now, right now, I think the vast majority of regular people are not acutely aware of what movies go on post-theatrical, whether it's VOD or streaming, when.
Mm-hmm.
But a generation from now, is that going to be the case? I don't know.
Right.
You
What
have
are
a
we teaching
generation
our
of
children?
kids that have never grown up with what we consider theatrical windows.
Right.
They're going to be even less inclined as adults to see something in theaters when they, for them, it's just osmosis. They know that this Universal title comes out in 21 days, or
Right.
this Disney title goes to, PVOD in 60 days, or whatever.
Here's what that makes me think of. I mean, I think we'll all remember this reference point as kids, anti-drug ad. The child is caught smoking pot. The father asks, "Where did you learn to do this?" And the child looks at the father and says, "I learned it from you." And I do think we're raising a generation of kids who someday they're going to be watching something on PVOD instead of going to the theater. And they're going to look at their parents and they're going to say, "I learned this from you." And we all just have to accept
I'm sorry.
that.
You're jumping in and out. I apologize.
I was just saying we're teaching some poor learned behavior for these children, this generation, in that they're good and they look up and they say, "I learned it from you."
But we're also teaching them in terms of their interest not being valued.
Mm-hmm.
Because instead of reacting to Five Nights at Freddy's and greenlighting 100,000 relatively inexpensive adaptations of present tense IP, we're doing another Matrix and another Exorcist and another Omen and another Indiana Jones and a gajillion franchises that were barely popular when I was a kid.
Right. So,
and we should not be surprised that children today look at that and go, why should I be expected to be interested in 85-year-old Harrison Ford, who I don't know, because I, if anything, I watch Star Wars and that's it. It's not like I, watch Hunt for October, or it's not like I watch Patriot Games with my dad, because that doesn't happen anymore. So, why should I care about that? Why should I care about Michael Keaton as Batman 30 years after some other Batman movie that maybe I saw once? And that is a huge problem, because if you give the younger generation something that they want to see in theaters, they'll show up.
Right.
But if you don't, they won't.
Right. Yeah. I mean, there better be a Five Nights
deal behind.
I was just saying there better be a Five Nights at Freddy movie going.
And that's one reason why Bad Boys Ride or Die did very well, is because the last film was so good and it stood up. It justified itself artistically and commercially, and it just, regardless, it was a good movie whether you liked the Bad Boys franchise or not. So you had, and I'm simplifying here, half the audience that loved Bad Boys from the olden days, and you had half the audience, that many of them were younger, that showed up to Bad Boys for Life and said, "This is terrific." And then when Bad Boys Ride or Die came out, Sony very smartly sold it as a direct sequel to that one that you liked 4 years ago.
Yes.
Well, as opposed to what Fox stupidly did in 2017, where after Prometheus made $400 million by being a kind of sort of prequel for Alien, instead of making, selling it as Prometheus 2, they said, "Oh, it's an Alien movie for real this time. Isn't that exciting, children?"
Yep.
Yeah, and I think the way also culture moves so much faster, and when we were younger, we took whatever slop was left over. We had to watch
Mhm.
Gilligan's Island reruns. We had to
Yes.
watch Petticoat Junction. These kids don't have to do that. They
Right.
have other options, and the movie industry and the studios have to keep up, and that's hard when that machinery moves so slow. But
Right.
they have to streamline it and make it move faster so they can be up to date with what kids want.
Right. So,
Yes,
Scott, I know you're at time. If you have a minute, I just have one more
I
movie I
do.
want to run by you that's coming out later this month.
Oh, here
Want to
we
get
go.
your take on it. Horizon, an American Saga, Part 1, Kevin Costner. I mean, it's been a roller coaster ride. At first, we thought the news from Cannes was good because we heard about the standing ovation, apparently a very long standing ovation. Kevin Costner was crying. Then the reviews coming out. We're
This is
getting word
exactly what happened with Indiana Jones last year.
you can't trust the ovation then, I guess, for these movies fronted by elderly stars. They're selling double packs where you could get tickets for both parts 1 and
Which I
2
like. That's
together.
cool.
Oh, I like that, but it feels like it could be a sign of desperation. But you tell us, where are you at as of today?
Oh, I mean,
Horizon.
barring a miracle, I mean, it will probably do Wyatt Earp numbers, and that's about that.
Okay.
And
So,
that's I'm seeing it tomorrow, and I'll be honest, I'm looking forward to it.
Mhm.
But
oh wow.
the tracking is not where they want it to be, and while there are 3 weeks left, 2 weeks left, the reviews aren't ecstatic,
Mm-hmm.
and I can't imagine that many people that are on the fence about seeing an original 3-hour part 1 of 4 Western, R-rated Western in theaters that are going to go from maybe to yes in the next 2 weeks to enough of an extent to actually move the needle. So unless tracking is vastly underestimating, the Yellowstone demographic, and that's entirely possible.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think this does even open range numbers.
Wow.
Okay.
Great movie 15 years ago, but that
Right.
movie cost $22 million
Right.
and it was 2 hours and change.
Right.
So, Scott, my theory here is when we're talking about tracking, the people who are going to come out for this movie do not want to be tracked. They
Mm-hmm.
they are people who do not tweet. They do not. They are making their own electricity, right?
Yeah. They
These
don't
are
answer the doorbell, you don't
No,
think,
they
for
don't answer the
surveys.
doorbell, right?
Yeah.
And so these are the people that are going to come out of the woodwork. Literally, they're going to come out from woodworking. They're going to come out of the fields. I've said this. I don't want to, reiterate this too much because I said this last time. I think there is a majority of the people who are going to see this movie are not the majority of people who go see movies regularly. And so I do think it's going to be an unsettling theater experience to have some people covered in soot sitting in these aisles stoically with their hands folded. But I
Mm-hmm.
do think that they're going to come out. Now, this is what I say. $12 million is underselling this movie. There's going to be so much trudge up business, which I will call that, because they're going to be trudging up because they're so tired from the back-breaking work that they do every day of their lives. They're coming to see Kevin Costner, one of their icons, their tribal chief, if you will. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that this is 12 million is vastly underselling what this movie is going to make.
So what you're saying is that people will come, Ray. People will most certainly come. They'll
Yes,
come to
there
the
we go.
theater to watch
Mhm.
Kevin Costner play cowboys and Indians. And it'll be like they dip their hands in magic waters, for it is money they have and peace they crave. This movie, this genre, it's a reminder of all that once was good about Hollywood and could be good again. People will come. People will most definitely come.
See,
Sorry.
how have you not been on stage in 17 years?
Wow.
My
I mean,
goodness.
is there a better way to end this episode and to preview the BO Boys live on stage with Scott Mendelson October 8th? Buy your tickets now. This is going to be an incredible event. Scott Mendelson, Jeff Bach, the BO Boys on stage, talking Joker, talking the box office. Scott's first performance in 17 years. Get your tickets now. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's it, guys. Email us, theboboyspodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on social media.
Well, Pat, we didn't give numbers for Inside Out 2.
Well, let's see.
85.
85 from Scott. Where are you
Lazy.
going, Clayton?
79.
79.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be the guy who says it does 91. I think it gets over the original. I maybe I'm swayed by the wannabe mom who was sick in the toilet all week, but has to take her kid because of McDonald's hamburger wrappers. But I think 91 million. I think
Great.
it gets there. Email us your predictions, theboboyspodcast@gmail.com. Take us to a live show in the show notes, of course. And watch on YouTube, 5 stars Apple Podcasts, all that. And Scott, anything you want to plug on the outside scoop? Anything big that you're working on? Obviously,
The
everything's
outside
big.
scoop is what it is. I try to write once a day.
Wow.
I try to do relatively consistent newsletter formats where I basically drop a handful of articles of varying lengths. Let's see. We do the whatever the hell I call my podcast. I think it's called the Box Office Podcast for SEO reasons.
Yes.
And that's still going swimmingly with Lisa and Ryan and Jeremy. Let's see. Other than that, yeah, just I'll be very curious to see how Inside Out 2 does. I'll be very curious to see how A Quiet Place Day 1 does.
Mhm.
I am slightly bullish. Bullish. Wait, which one's good?
Bullish
yes.
is good. Bulls are good. Bulls are good.
Because it's a well-liked franchise that has pedigree, but is it, the pessimist in me wonders if it's another The Kingsman. I don't think so, but that's my fear.
I'm excited for it. And I think I felt the crowds respond every time I've seen that trailer. I think it's just it's a movie that gives you what you wanted if you like the first two, based on the trailer. Obviously, I haven't seen the movie, but it seems like that's what people expect. So I'm bullish on it as well.
And one thing I will say, and I'll be really quick because I'm the one that needs to leave. It is fun to talk about the people that are going to show up to Horizons in terms of, but I think it's worth noting that the media has become so geek and youth centric and focused over the last decade or so that I have to remind myself as a 44-year-old father of 3, stuff like Yellowstone and Horizon and Jack Ryan and The Lincoln Lawyer, that's what I should want to watch.
Right. Right.
And it's weird that I almost, it's just like, I'm a dad. I should want to watch dad TV.
Yes.
And we'll see. I hope you're right. I hope that there is, the silent majority, if you will.
Yes.
But so, yeah, because I do think, but again, it's I don't think that's going to move the needle. I don't think the difference between, a $12 million opening and a $30 million opening.
Okay. But
I do think I wouldn't be surprised if it, again, does open range business, but it cost 5 times as much as open range. So, if in a couple of years we see Kevin Costner doing play-by-play announcements at the Universal Studios Waterworld Stunt Show Spectacular, we'll know things didn't go well.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if he comes back for Yellowstone season 6.
That's joking aside. That's a more realistic.
Is he co-starring with Chad Michael Murray? I mean, we didn't even bring that up. But is Casper Van Dien and him gonna team up?
Oh boy.
Ooh, woofa.
Kevin Costner, Charisma Carpenter, here we come. Oh man. All right, guys. So I think we've said everything, Clayton. There's nothing left to say.
Yeah, there's nothing left to say.
Nothing.
Except for until next time.
We'll smell you at the